So now we're going to talk about large numbers. We're going to go from the numbers 101. Oops. We're going to go from the numbers 101 to 3 million. Actually, you could go beyond 3 million, but anyway, so that's kind of where we're going to. Okay, so we already know that ciento is used in compound numbers from 100 to 200. So you know that it's cien when you have just plain old 100. I guess I'll put it up here. When you have plain old 100, you say cien. But as soon as you go over 100, like if you have 101, you use ciento uno, etc. So just like there's repetition in English, there's repetition in Spanish. So when you're doing the hundreds, 200 to 900, you're going to use the number cientos. Okay, so what they do there is, so you can see what you've got for the 200, it's dos cientos. So I'll do that, but I'm going to take it out so you've got dos, wait a minute, dos, which is 2. Actually, let's do a different color, shows up a little better. And then that is added to cientos. Okay, so 300 would be tres, which is 3, added to 100, added to cientos. Okay, and I'll talk about that AS in a minute. So then cuatro, which is 4, whoops, added to cientos. That's how you get 400. 5, 7, and 9 are the ones that aren't going to quite fit the pattern. So 5, 7, and 9, you're going to have to memorize because they're different. Okay, but 6 does it. You have seis. Whoops. 6 is seis, so you have seis plus cientos. Okay, and then if you go to 8, you have ocho for 8 plus cientos. That's how you get 800. Okay, so then for 5, 7, and 9, you'll want to memorize that 5 is, actually, let's make it just make it a little darker. 5 is quinientos, like quince, because 500 would be a little hard to say. Okay, 7, instead of being siete cientos, which is also hard to say, you just kind of use the beginning that's like 70, so it's sete cientos, so quinientos, setecientos, and then 9 is like noventa, novecientos, instead of nuevecientos. They just would be too hard to say otherwise, okay? 1,000 is mil. So actually, let's look over here. Oh no, we'll do that in a minute. So 1,000 is just plain old mil, and when you want to add numbers to 1,000, you just add them, you add mil to it. So this is actually 4, right? The only thing you want to remember for 1,000, you don't need to put a 1 in front of it, but after that, if this is 4,000, this is 4, so you just say cuatro, and then you put mil, because it's not just plain old cuatro, it's 4,000. This is 100, but it's not just 100, it's 100,000, so you do 100, which is cien, and then you'd say mil, cien mil. And then a million is un millón, with the accent, and then anytime you go above it, you're just going to say 3, which is tres, and then you're just going to make millions plural, millones, written as 2 separate words. So if it's like 10 million, it's going to be 10 millones, 100 million, 100 millones, okay, and that's pretty much it. So then let's look at these, and then we'll talk about some of this other stuff that's there. I mean, well, actually, there's a little bit more, but for forming the numbers, that's it, and then we'll talk about them in adjective form and so on and so forth. Okay, so we want to write these back out. We've got 592. So 500, if you look back over here, 500 is 500, so I'm going to write 500, and then I've got 92, which is 92. Okay, 10,000, 711. So 10,000, that's going to be 10, okay? I'm going to put my decimal point because I know I'm in the thousands, and then it's 711. 711. Un millón. So you do the un for millón, just not for 1,000. So you say un millón for a million, but then it's just plain old mil for 1,000. Okay. So remember this, mil is never used with un, and it's never used in the plural for counting. So it's a little bit different than the other form. So this is, let's give it 2 stars. Oops. Okay. All right, so this is un millón. Which would be 1 decimal point. 633, so I'm going to do 600. If I look over here, 600 is 633, but because this was a million, it's going to be 633,000, so I'm going to put another little decimal point, and then I have 209, 209, okay, 900,000. So 900 is 900, because it's 1,000, I'm going to put a decimal point. 121, 121. 2 millones, that's 2 million. 800,000, 800,000, 88. Okay, 145. That would be 145. Okay. The other thing that you want to pay attention to is in Spanish, they tell you that the year is always expressed in thousands, so they never do 1992. They would do 1992. So in Spanish, the year is always expressed in the thousands. Just like what we do now. I mean, we do, 2011. The plural of millones, millones, and when followed immediately by a noun, both take the preposition de. So if you're going to say, if you're using it as an adjective, trying to say you have a million of something, you need that of in there. So, whoops. So if I want to say like a million pesos, un millón de pesos, I have a million pesos, 2 millones de dólares. So anytime you say you have a million of something, like $1 million, a million cars, etc., you're going to want to use the de. But if you're just saying like 2,300,000 personas, you don't. It's only when millón is immediately followed by a noun. So if millón is what you're writing next to the noun, you're going to put the de. If you're not writing it, like here, 2,300,000, I don't need to put the de. So only if millón is going right next to the thing of which I have a million of, I'm going to need to put the de. And also you'll notice over here that I was putting decimal points. They do the opposite of us. They use, the period is for longer numbers and decimals are for a comma. So you might want to pay attention to this as well. That's why I have decimal points over here for my large numbers. So in Spain, 1,000 is 1.000. For us, it's with a comma, and they do the reverse. $2.50 would be 2,50. Okay. Numbers can also be used as adjectives. So, like for example, in this activity, when you're trying to say how many of something that you have to worry about agreement. Just like with one, if you'll notice, just the numbers 200 up to 900 worry about feminine versus masculine. So for example, here with 525 calculators, if I want to say I have 525 calculators, what I'm going to say is tengo 500 is 500, okay? But if you look over there, I can have 500 or 500, okay? 25 calculadoras, okay? Because what I'm talking about are calculadores, which is feminine, I'm going to pick the feminine spelling of 500. So tengo 525 calculadoras is how I would say that. Okay, and that is because they have to agree. That is feminine because the thing that I have 500 of is feminine. So here I have 816 pizarras. I would do the same thing. Okay. Tengo, oops, I don't want to do it in yellow. Tengo 800, which would be the same, or 800 pizarras. Well, because pizarras is feminine, I make it, oh, I'm sorry, it's 816 pizarras. So even though the hundreds isn't right next to it, because what I'm describing as being 800 are the pizarras, I have to choose 800, okay? But here, it's 111 notebooks. So I would say tengo 111,000 cuadernos. And I don't do anything to my ciento. You do it anyway, even if it's something feminine. You only make the change for the hundreds and the thousands. So like if I look over here, let's see if I can find one. I don't see any. Okay, so it doesn't even matter if your hundreds are in your thousands place, but even though they're here, they're all masculine anyway. You still would make it agree no matter what. So like 110 sillas, that's another example of one that you wouldn't change. You'd say tengo, or you'd spell it right. Tengo 110 sillas, because when it's 100, you don't make it feminine. But if you looked at another one that's feminine over here, that's 600. Did we already do that one? No, the computadoras, you would say tengo 672 computadoras, okay? Because computadoras is feminine, I'm gonna make my 600. Tengo 672 computadoras.